welcome to Go Learning Point tutorial. So in our last session we discussed about the features of Oracle 12c for the development purpose, and in this session we'll continue the same and we'll discuss about the rest of the features. And the next feature was the pluggable databases in Oracle 12c. So this feature is basically added for the DBA purpose only. So what does it mean that we can create PDB databases in Oracle 12c? So before that we were having the CDB, that is our container databases, so it will still be there, but we can create portable databases, that is our PDB databases, just for a specific purpose. So if you want to have the database for the specific feature, specific set of features, you can introduce PDB in your databases. And then you can just suppose, just for example, if you have multiple applications and you want to create a separate database for each of the applications, so you can, in your centralized database, that is our root database, that is our CDB, that is our container database, inside that you can define multiple PDBs, that is our pluggable database, and then you can point those pluggable database to multiple applications, so that it will be manageable and you can easily identify that which particular PDB is for which particular feature or application. So when you're defining the pluggable databases or PDBs inside the CDB, that is our container database, you can define maximum up to 252 pluggable database. So suppose you have 250 or 50 applications, you can define 50 PDBs for your database. The maximum you can define is 252, and that is a lot. So, and you can also switch between the pluggable database. You can fetch the data from multiple databases into one pluggable database. And these all PDBs will be accessible from the container, that is our root database. So next feature that we have is invisible columns. So in Oracle 12c, you can actually add a column, or while creating a table, you can actually add invisible columns in your table. When you define invisible columns, you just need to put a keyword invisible while creating the tables, just after the column name which you want to make invisible for that table. And this invisible columns will not be visible if you directly do select asterisk, select everything from that table. So that column will not be there in the result set. So for that purpose, you will have to explicitly mention those columns names which you have marked as invisible. Okay, so to define invisible columns, you can use invisible column while defining a column while creating the table. So this will not be appear in the select asterisk queries. You'll have to explicitly select, and suppose your table is E, so you'll have to like column and E dot star. So you'll have to explicitly mention this invisible column here. So E dot star is not going to include the invisible columns. Third point is that you cannot create invisible columns while defining temporary tables and actional tables and cluster tables. So if you are creating normal tables that we have in Oracle database, you can define invisible columns and you can access them explicitly by mentioning the table dot column name. Okay, so now let's see how this invisible column works practically. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating a table called test invisible columns, and inside this table I have defined 3 columns, that is first call, second call, and third call. And third column I have defined as invisible. So when I will try to insert records into this table, if I will mention this column explicitly, then only the values gets inserted into this table and this particular column. If we have just mentioned the 2 columns, or if we have not mentioned anything, just directly you're putting the values, then also only the values for these columns will be inserted and this column will get the null values. Then at the time of selecting the values, as we have already discussed, that you have to explicitly mention that invisible column to get the results. So let's just try to execute this. So first we are creating a table with third column as invisible. Oh, I created this already, so this is already exist. me just drop it first. This table is dropped, and let me just try to execute it now. So my table is created. Now if you describe your table, so there are only two columns. So the third column that we have defined here is invisible, but you can still insert records, you can still select records explicitly if you want. So what I'm doing here, I'm inserting values 1 and 2, so those values will get inserted into the first two columns, and third column will get the null values. So let's just try to insert some records into this. So I have inserted one record. Here I am giving values to all three columns. Let's execute this as well. Now if I do select asterisk from that table name, this is not going to include the third column. Okay, if you see, the first and second columns are there. So to display the third column where we have inserted value 5, you'll have to explicitly mention this third column in your select query. So just execute this, and if you see the first row where we have inserted values for the first two columns, the third column got the null values, and here the third column got 5 here. Similarly, you can create invisible indexes as well, and these indexes will only be visible by setting this parameter at the session level or at the system level. So if you want to set this at system level, you can just do alter system set optimizer use invisible indexes equal to true. If you want to set it for at session level only to optimize the particular set of queries, and you can just put a session here and you can just make it true, and you can just execute your queries, and you will be able to make use of invisible indexes as well for that particular session only. Next feature that we have is identity columns. It's similar to sequence that we have in Oracle 11g, and this is also going to generate the sequence of numbers. So if you have your table, like let's say if you have employee table and you want to generate employee IDs, you can use identity column for employee ID, and it will be generated randomly. It will be generated the incremental sequence of records. It's the same like the sequence that we have, but for sequence you'll have to create a sequence object, and you'll have to explicitly mention the next values at the time of inserting the records, right? But here everything will be managed by the Oracle. You just need to create a table, and at the time of creation you need to specify that which column is your identity column, and it will be incremented automatically as soon as you will start inserting records into the table. Let's see how this identity columns works practically. So in this example, what I'll be doing, I'll be creating a table identity test, and I have three columns here: ID, first name, and last name. This ID column I have created as an identity column, so you just need to mention generated as identity, and it will be generated automatically. Okay, now as soon as you'll start inserting records into this table, you need not to mention this identity column here. It will be generated automatically by the Oracle. So let's just try to create this. So let me just see if this particular table is already exist or not. Okay, so this is already there. Let me just drop it because I have used it earlier. So my table is dropped, and let's create this table now and try to insert these values. So all four values are inserted, and let's see if it has generated the identity column, that is our ID column. So if you see, ID column is populated as 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it is working just like sequence. It's just that you need not to create objects separately and you need not to maintain it separately. Okay, so it can also work like here this particular sequence is starting with 1. You can also specify that what would be the number, the starting point of for my identity column. It's just like a sequence we have to mention. So at the time of creating identity column, generated as identity, you need to give start with the number you want the start point and increment it by the same like a sequence number. Now the next feature that we have is default values in Oracle. So in our last feature, we have created identity column where it was incrementing automatically. In a similar way, if you have a column defined as a sequence and you want to specify the default values as sequence.nextValue, you can do that in Oracle 12c. So you need not to explicitly mention at the time of insertion that this is going to get the values from that sequence.nextValue. So at the time of table creation itself, you can define the default value as sequence.nextValue. Similarly, for other columns also, if they are null, you can put some default values at the time of table creation. So let's see how we work with these default values in Oracle 12c or other higher version. So in this example, what I'm doing, I'm creating a sequence. So I have not given any start point, so it will start by default with number 1. And then I'm creating a table test default values where I'm creating this particular column, the sequence value as number, and the default I'm giving as the sequence.nextVal, that is my primary key. Second column, the value 1, again a number, and I'm giving default. When it is null, it will assign it 99 values to value 1. Value 2 is a normal column, so let's just try to execute this and then we will try to insert records into this table. So the first insert is actually inserting values to value 1 and value 2, that is my 1 and 2, and the sequence val will get the value as 1. The second insert, what I'm doing, I'm inserting the values in value 1, value 2, but value 1 is null, and as I have defaulted it to 99, this will get value as 99 as default. Similarly, this will also get as default 99 value. Third, for the statement, I have provided all 3 values for all 3 columns. So here, in this case, my sequence val default, this next val is not going to work. So this will get the value as 10. In the last statement, what I have done, I have given only value 2 column. So what it will do, it will get the value from the next val, sequence.nextVal, and for the second column, it will get the value as 99. So let's just try to insert all these values. So all the values are inserted. Now let's just see what we have in this table. So if you see this, so the first statement assigned a value from sequence.nextVal, that is our starting point as 1. Second statement assigned sequence.nextVal as 2, and the second column is null, so the default will be 99. Similarly for this also, here I have given the sequence value here, so it is not going to take the default value from sequence, so it has given it here as 10, and similarly for column 2 and column 3 as well. So this is how the default values works in Oracle 12c and higher version. Next feature that we have is the session specific sequences. So if you're defining a sequence, those will be available globally if you are not providing any session keyword. So in Oracle 12c, we have a session keyword that will actually work for only for your session specific queries. So if you want some sequences that will get the values only at the session time, and you can define those sequences as session specific. So you just need to mention a session keyword at the time of creating the sequence. So if you define a global sequence, you just need to specify the global keyword, and if you define the session keyword, those will be available only for that session. Next feature that we have is grant roles to PL SQL programs only. So earlier what in Oracle 11g, if you're creating a procedure and inside the procedure you are selecting data from some tables, so you'll have to explicitly give read permission to those tables as well. But after in Oracle Tulsi or after Oracle Tulsi, if you're creating a program or package or a procedure, you just need to give permission to that program only, and you need not to explicitly give read permission to the underlying tables that you have used in that particular procedure, function, or packages. Next feature that we have is PL/SQL accessible by clause. So what does it mean? If you want to access one package into another package, so that was not possible in Oracle 11g or any version below the Oracle 11g. But in Oracle 12c or higher version, we have this facility to use package into another package. So for that purpose, you just need to mention this keyword accessible. So in this example, what I have done, I have created a package A, and I'm mentioning this package will be accessible by package B. So inside this package B, I can actually use the functions or procedures that I have created in package A. Next feature that we have is the enhancement that they have done in Oracle Tulsi for the with clause, that you can actually define PL/SQL functions and procedure within the with keyword. So while defining that statement, the with statement, you can actually create just after with clause, you need to specify that function or a procedure. So if you're defining a procedure, you will have to call that procedure inside the function. So this we have already discussed in our previous session, and I'll just paste the link into the video description link for this particular functionality that we have in Oracle Tulsi. Next is online DDL statement. So what used to happen in Oracle 11g or below Oracle 11g version, whenever you're performing any DDL operation on a table, then all the current operations will have to wait for that operation to get completed. Okay, so but now in Oracle Tulsi or higher version, you can actually perform all DDL statements, few of the DDL statements online without interrupting the other operations that are going on. Okay, so these are the operations that you can perform, that you can create an index visible or invisible that we have already discussed, and you can just set unused columns online, drop constraint online. So earlier, what will happen in Oracle 11g, if you are dropping a constraint on a table, this will actually lock that particular table, and if anything is happening, any select operation or insert operation is happening, that will have to wait for this particular query to get executed. But in Oracle 12c or higher version, if you mention this keyword online, then they need not to wait. Any DML operations will be performed parallelly with this particular statement. Next feature that we have is DDL logging. So earlier in Oracle 11g, if you are performing any DDL operation like create table or alter table or modify table, this was not possible to track those changes. But in Oracle 12c, they have given a feature that you can set this parameter, set enable DDL logging to true at the system level as well as at the session level. So system level will be visible globally and session level will be visible to only for your session specific queries. Okay, now every time you will invoke any DDL statement, it will actually it will actually capture those logs into XML file, and that XML file will be available at this location. So you can just try enabling those parameters and just try invoking some of the DDL statement like alter system and alter session. So with this, you'll have to enable that parameter, and you just try to add few of the columns to the table or just modify something with the DDL commands, and that will be tracked under this location into an XML file. Now the next feature that we have is period definition on column definition on tables. So what will happen if you're defining any columns, you can actually give the validity of a start date and end date for that particular column values. Okay, so this is kind of a range that you can give at the time of table creation itself, and while inserting the records, it will actually check for the start date and end date you have given for that particular column. So let's say if you have the employee table and you have a column joining date, there you can actually give the start date and end date, and anything falling within this range will be there in the table. The rest of the records will be removed from the table, or whatever the operations you have performed based on the date range you have selected. Okay, so the next feature that we have is for DBA purpose only, and that is PGA aggregate limit. So before Oracle tells C, this parameter was not there, so we were not having that facility to manage the PGA size. But in Oracle tells C or higher version, we have this parameter that we can set in initialization parameter file, that is our init.ora file. And as we have already discussed, that every time you're making changes to initialization file, that is our init.ora file, you'll have to restart your database to make that particular change visible throughout the database. The next feature that we have is moving the partition to different table space online. So this you can also do online. That means this is also part of this feature that is similar to this online DDL statements. What facility we have here is, if you have created a table and you have assigned a table space to that table, and that those data files those are assigned to table space are full, and you need some more partitions, you need some more space, and you want to shift from the older table space to newer table space, you can do it online. So you just need to invoke this command alter table, the table name, and move the partition, the existing partition, to the new table space that we have. Okay, so earlier in Oracle 11g, you'll have to write the set of statements to accomplish this particular task, moving partition from old table to a new table space. So next feature that we have is temporary undo table space. So we already know that there is an undo table space that is used for the DML operations and the DDL operations as well, but DDL's operation will take less amount of undo space. So whenever you're trying to invoke some DML operations, and whatever the changes we have will be stored in undo table space itself. So earlier in Oracle 11c, if you are creating any temporary tables at the time of creating the procedures, and whenever you will invoke that particular procedure and you are trying to insert some records into temporary table, those you are processing later into the core tables, but at the time you are storing those records into temporary table, those will actually be stored into undo table space. But in Oracle 12c, they have given a feature that those can be stored in table itself, temporary table itself. So you need not to use that undo table space, just to avoid any interruption, or just to avoid any error like undo table space size is increased or size is already full. So what are the benefits? That the low undo table space for the usage and the less redo data generation. So if we are in Oracle 12c, the temporary tables that you have created at the time of creating the procedure, and when you're invoking those procedure and you're trying to insert records into temporary table, undo table space will not be used. So these records will be there in temporary table itself. So these are some features that we have in Oracle 12c for the development purpose, and you can just go through all of them. I have created the one more video that is about part 1, and this will be published as part 2. So you can just go through both the videos, and I will paste all these things into video description link. And thanks for watching my tutorial, and like, share and subscribe to get more updates.